where is that, so to speak? So, that is the idea of Goloka. And the Panchama Purushartha, the fifth goal of life, Prem Prayojan, beyond Mukti, Gopala, Turyatita, fifth goal of life, if you will, fifth dimension. And the beautiful means that corresponds to that beautiful end is the Rag Bhakti taught by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In this case, there's two principal forms of Rag Bhakti given by Rupa Goswami, Sambandhanuga and Kamanuga. They correspond with what's called Sambandharupa and Kamarupa. Sambandharupa and Kamarupa refers to the eternal associates of Krishna who are engaged in bhakti rasa with him. Those who are in Vatsalya, learn to love, dasya, servile love, and sakya, fraternal love, they're called sambandha, sambandha rupa, the form of sambandha. Here, sambandha means relationship. Relationship means, well, if you're somebody's parent, you have a relationship with them. If you're somebody's friend, you have a relationship with them. If you're somebody's teacher or the student of someone, then, or like Juan, as a servile position here, and we all do, but then that's a particular relationship. So that's what Sambandha Nugu covers. That's presided over by Balaram. Then you have the other category, Kamarupa. And Kamarupa means, well, it's one way to understand it is by comparison. The Kamarupa is that interaction that's not based on a relationship that is within the social system, let's say. Kama means like just desire, and sometimes it's described as lust. So to have a relationship based on lust would be outside of what is socially acceptable in the Vedic social system. And to some extent, that's true in all societies, even today, right? So if you're married to someone, doesn't matter if you're a devotee or a non-devotee or an atheist, there's usually in most relationships a sense that we belong to one another, we've committed to one another, and if out of lust the partner, one or the other, is found to have violated that kind of commitment, sacred commitment, bond, and so forth, well, it's thought to be inappropriate. It's grounds for divorce. It could get you, lose your job, or lose your political standing in the eyes of others, and so on. So that's not something that's out of unrelated to the societal norms in which we live. Obviously, things have become more liberal along those lines, but nonetheless, there's still a strong sense of this, and what to speak of then in the Vedic society times of yore, hundreds and thousands of years ago. It was true in Western countries as well. So Kamarupa means, well, they're Kamarupa, the form of Kam. So it's outside of what's allowable, if you will, acceptable, socially acceptable relationship. That's the gopis' love. It looks like Kam, of course, it's Prem. So Kam and Prem, they look similar, but they're like different as night and day. The motivation behind them is entirely different. Bhakti, Prem, love, tends to hide itself. That's why we're told if we want to understand the Bhagavatam, we have to pay very close attention and listen regularly with good association. Otherwise, it'd be misunderstood. You'll see Sukadeva is concerned here as he explains even this Lila to Pariksit Maharaj that it will be properly understood, so to speak, of the romantic affairs of Krishna. So then Sambandhanuga is that following in the footsteps of those examples of Sambandhanuga. Kamanuga is a form of Raganuga that follows the gopis' love for Krishna. Now here we're dealing with a form of the Sakya form of Sambandhanuga. I mentioned that Baladev presides over the Sambandhanuga, and I think I've mentioned earlier or at other times that the composition of his bhava is Sakya, that is bundled together with a little bit of Dasya and a little bit of Vatsalya. So it's very appropriate then for him to preside over all three. Sometimes he shows, and we'll see it in this chapter, the end of this chapter, he shows that Dasya Bhakti for Krishna. It's an aspect of his Sakya Bhav. In other chapters, he shows also the Vatsalya as the older brother. It's worth noting, as we just talk about it in general, that Balaram's Sakya really defines him, and he is fully, if you will, Balaram in Braj. When he goes as Mahasankarshan, Mool Sankarshan, expansion of Balaram with Vasudeva Krishna, the expansion of Krishna in Braj to Mathura for that metropolitan Leela, and from there to the celestial Leela in Dwarka, then the equation shifts and the Dasya Bhakti aspect of Balaram's what's called Sankul Bhav is prominent. But at any rate, he presides over that side, and we can look at Radha presiding over Kamanuga Bhakti. So this is the wonderful and beautiful path, if you will, that corresponds with the beautiful nature of the intimate dealings between Krishna and his associates in the secret Sweta Dweep, like a private island. Dweepa means islands. That is Goloka. There's a private, not unknown even in Vaikuntha. Knowing about it in Vaikuntha will be a problem for the Bhava of Vaikuntha. They have to look at Narayana as in a certain way, and to think that he's like that, and other than he might show that as for a moment or something, for fun on his own purpose. There's a whole realm, and this is problematic for them. So we're back to this Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. Our emphasis for our purposes, it's not something that can be emphasized for those devotees who pursue the majestic love, reverential love of God. So anyway, then we turn to the second part to review of the chapter, which was about the liberation of Aghasura. And I think it's important to speak of it like this. We can say Krishna killed Aghasura, Krishna killed Putana, Krishna killed Bhakasura. Or more appropriately say, Krishna gave liberation to this one, and this one. And this is a special quality of Krishna. With regard to the point of Siddhanta that comes out so clearly in these chapters, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam, Krishna the source of all forms of divinity. Jiva Goswami raises a point in his Krishna Sandarbha, which is all about that point, that statement. And many points, but one of them relevant here to it for discussion is that only Krishna, amongst all the different avatars of Narayan, upon dealing with the some adharmic aspect in this world, and that involves, well, comprehensively dealing with the problem and doing away with it. Only when Krishna does it, does that offender or opposing character, the bad guy, get liberation. So if Ram deals with him, or Singha, or another one, Jiva Goswami shows in the Krishna Sandarbha, only when Krishna does this, does the demon get liberation. So it's a special quality of his. He uses this as just one more point. So see, he's special, he's unique. He has a power that exceeds others, a generosity that exceeds others, such as his nature. So it's more appropriate to speak about the liberation of Aghasura, which is what we heard in the second part, and how it astounded Sukadev, it astounded the demigods. Such a commotion was created in the heavens, because here are these highest heavenly denizens, if you will, looking in on the scene as is described, and they don't have liberation. Then here comes Aghasura, who's not only sinful, but he's an offender to bhakti at the same time, and intentionally so, right? Because he intended to kill Krishna and his friends, and then by that take the life out of all of the inhabitants of Vrindavan. He, as you know, we've heard, had this extra added impetus to carry out his plan above and beyond the fact that Kamsa expected that of him, requested that of him. That being that, well, Putana was his sister, Baka was his brother. So you couldn't find it would be hard to find a person was offensive, and offense being measured by the degree of intention, his intention being double the others, if you will, primary such henchmen figures, henchmen of Kamsa, and you got liberation. So the heavens are like, what the heck is going on here? And then they know how rare it is. They haven't got it. And here this fellow's been given it. And so there's a commotion in the heavens, and Brahma takes notice, and unseen by others, he comes on a swan, and that ends that second section. We've just been told that he's coming in on the scene. Now there's a background to this, of course, that Krishna's accomplishing many, many things at once. So one of the things that he's accomplishing here is he's bringing his devotee Brahma, his initiated disciple, at the dawn of creation, initiated him. He gave him impressions for Sakyarasa. Now, what that all means, what the implications of that, he's bringing him in for some siksha, and to introduce him to all that he needs to be introduced to understand the implications of what he's got, been the impressions he received, what the trajectory of his practice will result in. So we come to the third part. It's a short part of the section, carries a little bit over into the first couple of verses of the next chapter, and that is Parikshit's further inquiry. Now, you may recall that as we began this discussion of the 12th chapter, that we referred to the last verse of the 11th chapter. In the 11th chapter, we heard a little bit about this liberation of Vatsasura, the calf disguised, demon disguised as a calf, Bakasura. We heard about that. And as that chapter concluded, what did Sukadev say? He said, so this concludes the Bali Lila. Bali Lila means the Kumar Lila. That's such with the Kumar Lila. He's ready to move on. But Parikshit Maharaj wants to know more about, he's too excited about this. This is a new development. Again, he's moved now, as I said before, from Gokul Mahavan to Vrindavan, and he's actively and obviously involved in it. Obviously, the force behind very extraordinary things, dealing with these type of offenders and so forth. Previously, it wasn't clear that he really slayed Putana. He just sucked her breast. He didn't get up and break her neck or something like that. So this is Pariksit Maharaj become very enlivened by this. And he inquires in such a way that Sukadeva is pressed to continue a further narrative of the last part of Krishna's Kumar Lila, which is huge and has huge implications, but it would appear from the text, and we'll see it again today, that Sukadeva is a little reluctant to go into it. It's like a huge, so many points. And, if you sit and you want to explain something to your student, you have to think, where do I begin here? Where do I let off and so forth? But the enthusiasm of Pariksit, which is so much part of the equation of the Bhagavatam, there's the enthusiasm of Pariksit Maharaj to hear, which is so intense that having been cursed to die in 7 days, he gave up food and drink for 7 days. I mean, it's impossible, practically speaking. So, and he was drinking and eating and getting rest from the narrative of Sukadeva, and included all the other cantos too, not just the 10th canto. He was sort of living on this, right? Which speaks to his character, because the reason that he was cursed was it looked like he didn't have control of his temper, because having come into the sage's ashram, he wasn't greeted properly, and the sage who was sitting in meditation, he garlanded him with a dead snake, to which his son, the sage's son, took exception and cursed the king, which his father then said, you shouldn't have done that. And well, what's going on here? We see from the way in which he responded to the curse by accepting it as his fate, and then taking recourse to go to give up his kingly duties, go to the bank of the Ganga, ask pertinent questions, and pay attention, as I'm mentioning, to the extent that he did with such control of his senses. That's extraordinary. Then how could he lose his temper? So the two things, they don't go together. And the latter, the measure of his control exceeds in measure and duration a moment of losing his temper. Therefore, we have to look at the losing of his temper as something arranged by Krishna, that he could become the listener who would draw out, due to his interest and inquiring spirit, all that was stored in Sukadeva had been placed in his heart when he himself heard the Bhagavatam from Vyas. Imagine he was a good listener too. And so to find a good listener, as he does in Pariksit, well, that's very enthusing to Sukadeva. So he doesn't perhaps know how far he can go, how interested he is, and he repeatedly inquires and causes Sukadeva to go further. So really, this Brahma Vimohan Lila, it might have remained untold, and it's complicated too, how to explain it all. But we owe it to the inquiring spirit of Pariksit Maharaj, in one sense, more than Sukadeva, because he wanted to come out. He wanted, let me hear more about this Kumar Lila, this last part. I want to hear every part. This isn't the only thing that happened in this Kumar Lila. It's going in a different direction now, and it's very this is very interesting. He's out in the forest. This is a whole new section here. We're moving from his Kumar Lila's childhood, where his center of his love, Krishna's love, is his parents. That center is shifting now to his friends. So it's very significant. Parikshit's interested. So here we come today to this final section, where the inquiring spirit of Pariksit Maharaj again comes to the fore. And we hear Rajan Jagaram Charma Sukshma Vrindavane Dputam Vajo Kasam Bahutitam Babhuva Krida Gavaram. Prabhupada gives this translation. I'll read it. O King Pariksit, Sukadeva continuing his narrative, when the python-shaped body of Aghasur dried up, into merely a big skin. You can see some dried up snake bodies here if you stay here long enough. It became a worshipable, or excuse me, a wonderful place for the cowherds to sport within for a long time. Now, he's trying to wrap, what Sukadev's trying to do is wrap up the discussion here now. Aghasur has been liberated. Krishna's back with his friends. And he describes a very extraordinary thing. On top of the fact, that is, that Aghasur was liberated, he attained a what's called Sarupya Mukti. And this will come out a little bit more in a couple of verses ahead. Sarupya Mukti is a type of mukti. There are 4 types. We'll go into that, but it's typically not a type of mukti that Krishna gives to the demons. He gives them another type of mukti, sayuja. So we'll go into that ahead. But besides that, the body that he left behind, which is a material body, it was preserved and served a purpose that was fulfilling of the original ambition of Krishna's friends to have a sporting place. What if it is a big python and he just lets us sport in there, but go deep inside and come out? And, it sounds like a very exciting venture. So they had this desire, and their desire will be fulfilled by Krishna. Desire amongst the associates of Krishna in Goloka is there. Some like mangoes, some like papayas amongst his friends. There are different varieties, but all of these desires are rising out of rasa. So they're all pleasing to Krishna. Through them, those desires of the individual devotees, Krishna experiences papayas and on that tone, and mangoes on that tone, and so forth. So it's not a realm without desire. It's a realm where desire is tied to the Swarup Shakti, which is functioning only for the pleasure of Krishna. Therefore, his devotees, like himself, are Satya Sankalpa. Whatever they desire, it happens. Now, that's in a broader sense. Because there will be instances where it looks like gopis didn't want Krishna to leave, but he left. How is their desire fulfilled? But I'm saying in the context of rasa. So in contrast to this, of course, in material life, our will is tied to the Maya Shakti. And the more we become under the influence of the Maya Shakti, the more our will recedes to the background. And the more we begin to function like a robot, just carrying out activities that we've developed some scars for, impressions for, tendencies for, habits for, vasanas. And so those circumstances more or less dictate what we'll do. And very few people have a connection with their will to willfully change course. It's difficult, but will is there. Of course, it's an aspect of the jiva. If that weren't the case, if we didn't have will, what would be the meaning of the scriptures that say don't do this and do that? It's not talking to robots, right? So we have will. It's important, but the more that we come out from under the influence of the Maya Shakti, the more the fact that we have will becomes prominent. And so much so that, well, we become Satya Sankalpa. Whatever we want happens. What we will only want in relation to the environment, which is the Swarup Shakti that's all pleasing to Krishna. So they wanted to play. And this is one reason why the body was preserved, which is miraculous in itself, right? We're reminded, of course, in this instance of the idea that while we will ultimately participate in Krishna's Lila in what's called a Siddharupa, Siddhadeha, spiritual meditative form, like a gopa or a gopi, we have a sadhaka deha, a practitioner's body. And I think I mentioned before, well, it's a little different than a material body because its senses are in touch with sense objects for the pleasure of Krishna. Not all the time. So there's a material side to it and a spiritual side to it. But the idea is that the spiritual will overtake the material in due course, which in effect would mean that the senses and the mind are only in touch with the outer objective world for the pleasure of Krishna. And so for all intents and purposes, the sadhaka deha becomes spiritual. Now, this is how do we figure that? How do we understand that? I mean, the body dies, how is it spiritual? Well, this is an article of faith, but it's mentioned in the scripture, but there are some examples by which we can maybe our faith can be captured a little bit more in this regard. As far as analogies go, Prabhupada used to like to give the analogy of the Siddhadeha, the meditative body in a meditative land. You see, Goloka and the pastimes is a samadhi. It's a meditation. You do kirtan to go into that meditation, and you're living in that meditation. And inside of that meditation, you're doing kirtan. What kind of kirtan is that? In Golok, there's kirtan also. Jai Ram, Jai Krishna. So, Prabhupada compared that to gold and the spiritualization of the sadhaka deha to a gold-plated box. So you might have gold and a gold-plated ornament. They serve the same purpose to a large extent. He gave that kind of example. But there are more extreme statements given in the scripture, like, for example, in relation to Dhruva Maharaj, a famous one. Dhruva's exploits are described, I think, in the third canto, and in due course, he is taken to Vaikuntha in his sadhaka deha. So this is something kind of like a Catholic idea of transubstantiation, where in Catholicism, the blood or the wine and the bread are turned into the blood and the body of Christ, and it's supposed to be a miracle, right? That's what they look at. So material elements, there's a transubstantiation, they've turned into something spiritual. So the idea is there in other traditions, and it's a prominent idea in Gaudiya Vaishnavism that the Sarup Shakti can take over the Antakarna, the internal subtle body, and that will then dictate or control the functions of the physical body. And in that condition, and as I say, that body is functioning for all intents and purposes as a spiritual body. But most of them don't just take off with wings at the time of death. But the idea that their body has become spiritualized is one that is held by the community of devotees, such that instead of, for example, performing the cremation, which is traditionally the part of the funeral rite in Hinduism, the body of the sadhu is entombed, and that tomb is called a samadhi, and it becomes a place where you go and sit, chant japa, and are able to commune, perhaps, with that person. And you're meditating on his or her sadhaka deha, or you have pictures. Now, we didn't have photographs in times gone by, but maybe some paintings. But now they have photographs of sadhus, so you keep them, and and you pray to them, and they've passed away. So we know they're in Golok, let us say, but here's their sadhaka deha. It's got to be, it's eternal too. And you can get visitations from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, from Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, and Rupa Goswami appeared, Sarup Damodar appeared before me and told me to write this book, Bhagavat Arka Marichini Mal. The book of taking 1,000 verses from the Bhagavatam and categorizing them according to Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, according to the conceptual orientation, the action that follows, and the goal that will be the result of that. So there are many such stories or revelations on the part of sadhus having visitations from them in their sadhaka dehas. So in some realm, we think they are existing. Sometimes it's thought, well, they appear like that in Gaur Lila. Typically, the Gaur Lila is thought to be Swarup, that of a Brahmin boy. So what speak of the ladies then? What are we going to say to them about their sadhaka deha? So how much that plays out, it's hard to say, but regardless, you'll have a place there also. So some explanations fall short, but one of the points here that comes to mind, that gives rise to the discussion we're having at the moment is, well, here we find a liberated person by the touch of Krishna, and his body that was left behind was preserved. It had no odor, it didn't decay, and it became a place of sporting for Krishna's friends. And there are other examples of the sadhu passing, and for some days, what do they call that? Rigor mortis not setting in, and the body not deteriorating. And this is true even in different lineages outside of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. There are some tellings like this, reports like this on the part of the disciples, and they kept his body for 30 days. There it was preserved, and this kind of thing. So there is, we shouldn't underestimate the power of bhakti and spiritual discipline to one extent or another, spiritualize the whole world, what to speak of our body, right? After all, Maya Shakti is a shadow of the light of the Sarup Shakti. So if the light should shine in the dark area, well, there's no more darkness. There's an interesting relationship between the Sarup Shakti and the Maya Shakti. They're opposites. So opposites means some likeness is also there. If they're exactly opposite, then they're similar. So there's a similarity between the Maya Shakti and the Sarup Shakti. That's in terms of their, well, that the Tatastha Shakti doesn't share. I mean, there's a similarity between the Tatastha Shakti and the Sarup Shakti as well, but that's different. So, for example, let me give you another example. We have Radha, we have Durga, and another name for Radha is Durga. We have Yogamaya and Mahamaya. Sometimes probably give the example of electrical energy. It can cool or it can heat. So you'll find this throughout the scripture. There's this similarity. So the idea of turning the darkness into light, something like that, is not something to be dismissed. And with regard to the statement here in the Bhagavatam, therefore, we have a reason to believe the body of the snake, the serpent, remained there for 1 year. Now he says for a long time, but now he'll go on from here and really perk the curiosity of Pariksit Maharaj, even as he's trying to bring it to a conclusion here, which Pariksit won't let him do. as we'll see. So Pariksit says, oh, well, he goes on, Sukadev, this incident of Krishna saving himself and his associates from death and of giving deliverance to Aghasura, who had assumed the form of a python, took place, Sukadev says, during Krishna's 5th year. Okay, we know, he's just reiterating, this is the last year of his Kumar, childhood Lila. It was disclosed in Braj, in the village, after 1 year, as if it had taken place at that time. Well, he just dropped the bomb here. He's trying to get out of going further with it. Well, he just dropped the bomb. So this is another wonder in the mind of Pariksit Maharaj. What? How could they keep a secret of this kind for a year? And they're just young boys. And they're this is an extraordinary exploit that they experience today. And so many things we've heard about it, that they're prone to want to now immediately compose songs about it, which is they're quite capable of doing. Put it to music, sing it on the way back, tell it to the parents and others and so forth, and whether they're believed or not, right? But they believe it. These heroic pastimes of Krishna are very close to the Sakas. When they see his heroism, that's an udipana that stimulates their Sakya Bhav. So it won't act the same way for Yasoda. It won't, for the gopis, they'll think, wow, he's the man of my dreams, a hero. But the coward boys in particular get excited and they think, yeah, we can do that too. And they can. Any one of these coward boys could have easily defeated Aghasura, but the Lila Shakti doesn't allow them to, so that the divinity of Krishna in the midst of his human pastimes can be brought out for our attention. Of course, he wants to bring out the divinity of all the boys as well, but that in relation to Krishna. They are constituted of his own internal energy, so they can't be overcome by the Maya Shakti. Brahma doesn't know that. He doesn't know that he's going to come in and see the very personifications of the love that is his ideal and not understand them for what they are, what their power is, and how it exceeds all of the magical powers that Brahma has, which are considerable, but mundane. So, as I say, now Sukadeva has just dropped the bomb, and Pariksit Maharaj's mind starts to explode. So there's no way that this conversation or this discussion is going to be closed down. He is going to want to know. But he tries to continue on rather quickly. It's like if you're in a football game and you throw the pass and it looks like somebody caught it, maybe he stepped out of bounds, maybe he didn't. And so the coach on one side has the opportunity to question the call. Was it a catch or was it out of bounds? So the other team the team that did the play quickly lines up and tries to run another play before he can throw the flag, because once the other play starts, then you can't go back and look at it. So this is what Sukadeva, he wants to go on here quickly. He just, what did I just say? And let me say something more to just push this thing forward. Before flag of Pariksit Maharaj would come out. What the heck was that? So Sukadeva continues. This incident of Krishna saving himself and his associates. I'm sorry. He continues. He says, "What? That Krishna is the cause of all causes, and the causes and effects of the material world, both higher and lower, are all created by the Supreme Lord, the original controller. When Krishna appeared as the son of Nanda," he's talking now. Krishna's appeared as the son of Nanda. I know he looks just like a boy, ordinary cowherd boy. Well, he says this happened by his Maya. means by his internal, by his yogamaya. And consequently for him to exhibit unlimited powers, well, it's not a wonderful thing. He has those powers. Really, what's more wonderful is that he's appearing as an ordinary boy. That's more wonderful. As I say, the powers are the subset of his madhurya. That such a powerful person would position himself such that he could interact with you as if one of you, one of us. That is the wonder of wonders. Wonder of wonders. That's why I say in Braj, there's more Aishvarya. Aishvarya is the Madhurya. If you think about it, that is extraordinary. Super extraordinary. But he's saying here, well, it looks like he did something wonderful, but it's not, if you know who he is, yeah, he's the son of Nanda, but such is his power, because this is who he is. He's now by his yogamaya, he's giving some theology by his yogamaya, he's appearing like this, but he is the supreme, use Prabhupada's phrase, the supreme personality of Godhead. Consequently, for him to exhibit unlimited opulence is not a wonderful thing. Indeed, he showered his great mercy such that Agasur, even Agasur, as we've seen, the most sinful miscreant, whose very name means sin, was elevated to being, this is Prabhupada's translation, one of the associates, achieving Sarupya of Krishna, of Narayan, achieving Sarupya Mukti, which is impossible for contaminated persons to attain. So here the words praptatma samyam in the verse. Prapta means attained. Atma samyam, oneness, likeness, samya, likeness. His Atma achieved likeness with Bhagavan, with God. So now, based on this, these words here in the verse, then one can make a case for Agasura attaining Sarupya Mukti rather than Sayuja Mukti, which is the normal course for most, not all, of the demons that Krishna liberates. Putana got something more. That's why, to revert back to one of our introductory lectures, we were talking about the Brahma Vimohan Lila and how some people don't accept it as being, or think of it as interpolation. They think the same about the verses that talk about the liberation of Putana in terms of her attaining a form of Vatsalya Bhav. They couldn't digest it. So here Prabhupada follows the lead of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who agrees, and Baldev Vibhushan also, that Krishna gave Agasura Sarupya Mukti rather than Sayuja. Sayuja is like, well, who wants it anyway, from the Gaudiya point of view? It's not for devotees. Sayuja means to merge into Brahman. There's no rasa there. And it's possible from there, even beyond that, from Shantarasa, by Krishna's grace or through Sadhu Sangha, for someone to move out of there and go to Dasirasa. It's possible. I mean, it would be a rare occasion. More likely it refers to, in this world, in that preoccupation as a Jiva Mukta, aspiring for Brahma Sayuja by good association, you could go beyond even Shantaras to Dasiras. But at any rate, that's not desirable for the devotees because there's no service there. Now, the interesting thing, of course, about Sarupya Mukti and Salokya and Shasti and Samipya is that these cowherds, they're not interested in that kind of, those four types of liberation either. Goodness. So these types of liberation, they pertain to Vaikuntha. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. One of these types of liberation is Salokya, living on the planet of God. Aren't the coward boys living on the planet of God? Not in their minds. So if it's not, they're not thinking that, and they're not experiencing that type of liberation, because the experience of Salokya is, I'm living on the planet of God. Oh my God. Now, living on the planet of God sounds pretty interesting, but it's like the idea of I'm living under the auspices and the reign of a benevolent dictator. A benevolent dictator is arguably a better form of government than democracy. Democracy is obviously troublesome in that, well, everybody doesn't think right. and often the majority of people will get it wrong, if you will, and be less well thought out, less well educated, less able to make a wise, exercise a wise opinion. So it can be very problematic. Now, it's very much appreciated today, and we appreciate it. It gives us certain religious freedoms and so forth, and other freedoms compared to dictatorships that aren't benevolent, which is more the norm. But there's this idea in Hinduism of Ram Raja, the kingdom of Ram, that God came as a king in the form of Ram to show, among other things, as a byproduct of his interacting with his devotees in Bhakti Rasa, a perfect political system. The king should be the representative of God. That doesn't mean he just has the powers of God, but he has the benevolence, beneficence, the kindness, the fairness. The Kshatriya is not just some kind of guy carrying a gun. I want to be a Kshatriya. We have met some devotees like that. I've said before that they really like the Shringadev, so they get real angry and stuff. I would tell them, if you really like the Shringadev, then you should be like Prahlad. Very, very gentle. He had no weapons. He gave no opposition even to the offenses and the way he was physically, mentally abused by his father. He just depended on Krishna, who then showed himself as Nrsimha, given the circumstances. So the kings are known well, Ram, for example, was known not for his military arts, which were there, he had them, and Lakshman and so forth, but for the way he reigned, and everybody loved him, and he was fair, dutiful, dharmic in all respects, and so forth. It's impossible to find such a person, political figure today. So, how do we get there? Salokya. So the idea is like, well, imagine if you were living on Earth in the perfect, under a perfect benevolent dictator, godlike. So it would be very nice. Now you'd have your own life, and you'd be a perfect citizen. You'd want to follow all the laws because all the laws made sense and they were fair and just, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean you're necessarily living in the palace with the king, that you're in his court. So people can have Salokya, live on the planet of God. I live in Vaikuntha. The Lord here is Narayan. Everything's wonderful. And some people desire that type of liberation and practice bhakti for that end. But that end is not prem. Prem is another thing. Prem is without the desire for sarupya, salokya, sarsti, or samipya. Sarsti means to have the same opulence. Salokya means to live on the same planet. Sarupya means to have a form like Narayan's. And samipya means to be close to him, like a personal attendant. And so there may be a gradation there. But none of these four types of liberation are as goals unto themselves, goals that constitute prem. They're, what does Jiva Goswami say? Sukha Ishvarya. So it's a desire for the happiness of that kind of majesty. Sukha means happiness. Sukha Ishvarya. To have the happiness, the joy of that type of godliness. To live on the same planet, they have a form like his. Now they love Narayan, but what prema is, that's another thing. That they don't have. Now there are other people in Vaikuntha who are there because they have desire for prema of Narayan, that kind of prema. So they've done the sadhana. Again, the practice, the way corresponds with what you attain. So their goal is to love Narayan, and they will inevitably accept these forms of mukti because they're part of the service that they want to render in the way they want to love Narayan. So that's a secondary thing to them. So that's a kind of prema in Vaikuntha. Now, it's not referred to as prema by anybody except us, Gaudiyas. And this is an insight of Jiva Goswami from the Gaudiya Sampradaya. What you will hear from a Vaikuntha Sampradaya is, well, they attain mukti. And they probably don't go into too much detail, but the Gaudiyas, they're going into detail about different statuses within Vaikuntha. You can get there by bhakti mixed with karma. That's not easy. Don't think that's easy. Bhakti mixed with karma means with varnashram mixed. You could go there. Not easy to do, but you can. Bhakti mixed with jnana, you could go. Pure bhakti, well, that's another thing. Then praying, we call it praying. Differentiate. Now you want to go to Goloka, that's another thing. That is praying fully expressed. It doesn't even look like mukti. It looks the opposite of mukti. Aprakrita. Prakrita means the world. Aprakrita. It doesn't look like, it looks like attachments. They're all attached to their village, to their cows, to their houses, to their friends, and all attached to Krishna. And they're just involved in what appears to be samsara. It looks like samsara. So difficult to understand. And in samsara, you have all these kinds of prema, right? Romantic love, servile love, romantic, parental love, friendly love, so on. And they're all there in Goloka. And the all of these types of liberation, samipya, salokya, shasti, sarupya, they're an impediment to attaining the prema that is our ideal. So these are Jiva Goswami says, these are special devotees of Govinda. He describes in Bhakti Rasa Prasidha in his commentary. Special devotees of Govinda. They have a different ideal altogether. So here we find, nonetheless, a devotional type of mukti, if you will, in Vaikuntha, where there is interaction between Narayan and the devotee. It's called Sarupi Mukti, has been given to Aghasura, rather than what is it called? Brahma Sayuja. Sayuja. This is so undesirable for the devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sayuja. They said, well, we'd rather go to hell than there, because in hell, maybe we get out and become a devotee. But there, you're merged in Brahman for all intents and purposes, and just sit there forever, quiet. I think someone is, what is that verse? Akasha Pushpaya, Kaivalyam Narakayate. While heaven is like flowers in the sky, which don't really grow there, it's just an imaginary thing, practically, from our perspective. Kaivalya, in the Advaitin sense, Brahma Sayuja, that's like hell. We don't want either of those things. We so much don't want Sayuja, we'd rather be in hell. That's what? That's liberation. You know, we'd rather be in hell because there's a chance there for better chance for getting association, and you're going to get out at some point. But when you enter into Brahma Sayuja, what's the opportunity for Bhakti Rasa? It's next to nil. We sometimes describe it as a spiritual suicide. So for the demons that Krishna kills to be liberated and go there, well, you know, as we say, hey, even demons go there. So who cares for the people who practice yoga and dhyan to go there, you know? It's another way, our way of our saying, we don't think too highly of those paths. We're not very interested in them, I should say. So anyway, so for Aghasura to achieve Sayuja, or Sarupya, well, that's even more extraordinary. And as Sukadev said, you know, there are different opinions, but Prabhupada here has gone, as I say, with Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's opinion, that of Baladev Bhusan. And it's there's room for a couple of opinions that could be supported in different ways. Pick which one you like. We like this one. And it serves to emphasize the extraordinariness of the Leela, that much more, to punctuate it in one hand, because it's a superior form of liberation, if you will. And as I've said before, it also serves as an introduction to the main philosophical point of the whole Brahma Vimohan Lila, which is Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. Because if he attains Sayuja, which is a form of mukti in Vaikuntha, by entering into Krishna, then Vaikuntha must be inside of Krishna. But you won't find Krishna in Vaikuntha. You look for him there. He looks similar, Narayan, but no, he's not carrying the flute. Maybe he'll show it to you and tell you, talk to Narad, he'll get you out of here. Get you out of Vaikuntha, where it send you where you belong. Somehow you come here on the way. So Vaikuntha is inside of Krishna, but Krishna is not in Vaikuntha. He says that. Naham Vaikuntha tishtami. Yoginam hridayeshu va. I'm not in Vaikuntha, he said. I'm not in the heart of the yogis, but wherever my kirtan of my name is going on, there I'm present. And this is the method of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Golokero premodhan, harinam sankirtan. That comes from Goloka, not from Vaikuntha. It comes from Goloka. And through that medium of Nam Sankirtan, the premadhan, the wealth of love of Golok is coming to the world. Brajendanandaniye Sachisuta Hoilo se Balaram Hoilo Nitai. They've come, Krishna and Balaram, as Gaur and Nityananda. And this is their method, the method to their madness. Very desirable madness. So I want to try to get to the conclusion of this section. Let me move on here. Even once, Sukadev says, or even by force, one brings Krishna into one's mind, one can attain a supreme salvation by Krishna's mercy, as did Aghasura. What then to be said of those whose hearts the Supreme Personality of God enters when he appears as an incarnation. So what Sukadev is saying here basically is, even if through meditation you can partially remember Krishna, it will be effective. So that shouldn't be wonderful then, what has occurred here, because Krishna is personally present in his Leela for everyone to see, even for Aghasura to see. And he entered into his body. So this is pretty extreme compared to like trying to keep Krishna in the mind by the force of meditation or a spiritual discipline. Difficult to do. Gopis, of course, are trying to get Krishna out of their mind. That's how much he's on their mind. they're struggling to forget about him, that unfaithful lover. What kind of samadhi is that, right? So anyway, this is his point, that the circumstances were such that here he's personally present. So you should expect something super wonderful would happen, because just remembering him a little bit can free you from all sins and give you deliverance. It's possible. Yet some acharyas have written, commented on this verse as to something I mentioned the other day, that putting Krishna on your mind is difficult. You can do it partially, but you could stand before the stone representation of Krishna in the form of the deity and serve him, just like he's right there. And if you do that, well, you'll understand he's right there. Because you say, could you add a little salt there? Then you're in big trouble. People ask why the deity doesn't talk to you. Talk to us. Well, if you did, you'd be in trouble. Then you wouldn't be able to do anything else, because I want this, I want that, I want that, get this, get that. We're not ready for him to talk to us yet, but once he does, then he does. So that form of the Lord is given emphasis then, because by meditating on it and engaging in his service with all of the senses, which is practical, like we do for ourselves. We need to put ourselves to bed. We need to brush our teeth. We need to take a bath. We need to cook, eat, dress. So do all those things for Krishna. All of your senses are engaged. This gives a great potential for the mind then to be absorbed more readily than just sit down, chant, meditate. Well, it's difficult. So it has the power to be more consuming. And as a result of that consuming of oneself, the mind can stop and be fixed. And one can find what this is all about. Experience, readily have the reciprocal bliss from serving, and then sit down and chant until the mind wants, then go back and serve. I remember visiting the temple near Banki Bihari in Vrindavan, where the descendants and disciples of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami resided. And Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was famous for his reciting of the Bhagavatam, different tunes, for the pleasure of Mahaprabhu and for cooking at the Radha Govinda temple. So anyway, I went there, and there they were, couple of ladies and a couple of brahmacharis and sannyasis, and what they did is they sat in the temple and they chanted. Arti came, they put down the Dartik, went back and chanted. Some service for the deity, they'd go for that. And no service for the deity, they sit and chant. Now more another Artik. Two of them need to cook, one need to clean, and back and chanting. That's what they did all day long, like this. It was very inspiring. So this point is being made here that, well, if a little meditation on Krishna can result in something wonderful, what to speak if he enters into your body and he's right there in front of you. So now suddenly Sutta Goswami comes on the scene. Sutta Goswami is narrating the conversation between Pariksit Maharaj and Sukadev. So something's happened here. Sutta Goswami said, "O learned saints, the childhood pastimes of Krishna are very wonderful. Maharaj Pariksit, after hearing those pastimes of Krishna, who had saved him from the womb previously, when he was in his mother's womb, became steady in his mind and again inquired from Sukadev to hear further about these activities." So Sutta is saying that Parikshit's not letting Sukadev end the conversation here. He has his heritage is mentioned, his special position, being favored by Krishna even within the womb. So he's not an ordinary devotee, and he's the ideal, disciple or listener, inquirer. And Suta's intervening here, entering in the conversation, because now really what's happened is he's going to explain that the Raj is going to ask him, how can this have happened? How can this have happened ended at this day, and the boys didn't talk about it for a whole year. And when they did talk about it, they talked about it as it just happened then. What's this all about? Tell me more. And this is what causes Sukadeva to pass out. He loses external consciousness. And he's losing external consciousness because his mind is going to the answer of the question of Raj Pariksit, in which there are two very extraordinary manifestations of Aishvarya, one arising out of the prema of Krishna for his friends, the other out of his love for his sadhaka, Brahma, whom he wants to teach a very significant lesson of tattva that will be a building block for his developing Sakyabhav. And how Krishna did that, his mind has gone there. And first to the picnicking of Krishna, where Krishna will also show some extraordinary Vaishvarya out of prem for those boys. And he passes out at the thought of what's to come and how he will possibly talk about it. So then Sud said, well, with great difficulty, to be brief, his consciousness was revived. Commentators just said Nard began to kirtan, and it's a big event. Bring Sukadeva to external consciousness. And having come to back to external consciousness, well then, we enter into the next chapter, and there'll be a couple introductory verses, and then the story will continue. Brahma Vimohan Lila ki jai, Sukadev Goswami ki jai, Raj Pariksit Maharaj ki jai, Suta Goswami ki jai, Gauri Vaishnav Guru Parampara ki jai, Kaji Gopal ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Brinda ki jai, Gaur Premanand ki jai. Hari Bol.